of the Earth Day Network and CEO of Bullet Foundation. He can answer all our questions. Denis? Good to see you. Have a seat. We were just talking about the 70s. I know the kids know what happened then, but just listen to this. We passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Toxic Substances Control Act, bans on lead paint and DDT, and a dozen other sweeping measures. We can thank you for that. And the whole movement. What was it about those years?
You know, the remarkable thing about that wave of legislation, and frankly it goes on beyond even those that you cited, is that it had massive positive impacts on America. I think that if you do a benefit cost analysis, easily north of $50 trillion of net benefit to the American economy, forgetting what it's done to the culture and to the biology and what have you. Comparable probably only to the New Deal in terms of its sweep, but the New Deal was led by an enormously popular president coming out of the Great Depression. This wave in the 1970s came from the grassroots up. It was people demanding of their representatives that suddenly we start taking better care of our environment and our own health.
We were talking, Bob and I were talking and noting that these are the citizens out there protesting, the ones who are marching. And I think in this administration, I think they will have a chance to really affect change. I know it's tough, but we have somebody there who wants to be liked, and he likes nice things being said about him. I think we need to stick with it.
Well, in fact, he is also enormously unpredictable, so I'd like to think you're right. The sometimes forgotten fact about the 1970s is that because Richard Nixon signed a bunch of legislation he's sort of thought of as an environmental president, he was not particularly environmental. In fact, he vetoed the Clean Water Act and was overwhelmingly overridden by both houses of Congress by such a margin that he never vetoed anything else. But the pressure was really on Congress. It started with things like the Dirty Dozen campaign, where we defeated 7 out of 12 incumbent congressmen, starting with George Fallon, who was the chairman of the House Public Works Committee. If you wanted a road, you wanted a federal courthouse, you wanted any kind of pork, it had to go through Fallon. When he was taken out in a primary by a young guy named Paul Sarbanes on an environmental campaign, it was like the shot heard round the world. And so one of the things that I think all of these events that we had in more than 500 cities yesterday in the March for Science, which was the theme of Earth Day this year, was really to communicate in 435 congressional districts that we're watching you. You've got a budget submitted to you. We want to make sure that you're passing a budget that respects the needs for scientific research and also for transparency and also for the integrity of the scientific process.
Give us some good news and maybe a marching order for this group here.
Well, there's just lots of good news. And for my secret love, you should never probably fall in love with the technology, but back in the early 1970s, I became enamored with photovoltaics. We had a plan under the Carter administration to drive the cost down spectacularly through mass production and get 20% of the nation's energy from all renewables by 2000. That went completely off the rails. But then it got picked up by Japan and handed off to Germany and then expanded through the feed-in tariff over much of Europe. And then the Chinese just went gangbusters on it. So today, solar, when the sun is shining, is the cheapest source of electricity for just about every place in the world. In Seattle, Washington, and trust me, Seattle is nothing like Phoenix. I've got a 6-story building that produces, and filled with commercial clients like Sonos, the acoustics people, or Intentional Futures, a virtual reality company. It's a straight commercial tenants. A 6-story structure generates enough electricity with rooftop photovoltaics that for the last 4 years it's run a 26% surplus over what the building is. I mean, so that's big. The fact that we've got so much efficiency happening in buildings that where we used to have cars that had 8, 10, 12 miles per gallon, they're now 40, 45, 50 miles per gallon. and a huge drift toward electric vehicles. And Toyota is now betting a lot on hydrogen fuel cells. And folks have lost money betting against Toyota before. I mean, these things are beginning to pick. People are getting more concerned with their diets, not only what they put in their body, but that grass-fed beef. Where does this stuff come from, and what is its impact on the environment? And perhaps most profoundly, now we're seeing a lot of people making decisions about how many children they are going to have for environmental reasons. I mean, arguably the best thing that I have done with my life is have one daughter, and she in turn is having one daughter, because we are well past the carrying capacity of the planet if we're going to be living in modern industrial societies.
I started my grass-fed beef company 12 years ago and went into Chicago with no antibiotics and no hormones and no market. So I had to establish demand and supply. And now, 12 years later, when I'm thinking I may have to get out of the business, I look around and the market has caught up with me. And they will select now our food, and it goes beyond grass-fed beef. What is healthy? We want to know what is in it. And look at the big corporations that have turned. I almost fell off when I was walking down the aisle in the supermarket, and I looked over to Pepsi, and it said, "No sugar." What? Well, it's stevia and the others, and high fructose corn syrup has become the devil. And they're even changing the name.
Sure, and again, on the theme of the environment, so much of the American Midwest, which could be the breadbasket of the world, is devoted to growing #2 dent corn, the #1 use of which is to make ethanol, which is spherically senseless. I mean, it makes no sense no matter how you look at it, except that presidential candidates want to win the Iowa caucuses, and so they continue to support ethanol. The second is to fatten cows, which is to make the beef more expensive and less healthy for us. Meanwhile, growing all of that corn is causing massive erosions. It's a mass misuse of water, and it's laden with pesticides that are all being flushed down the Mississippi and creating a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So by changing those diets the way that you are trying to do, you're reaching well beyond just the health of the consumers.
Let's talk about pesticides for a moment. You see that Dow Chemical and its scientists are asking the EPA to stall or look beyond, don't accept the research that 10,000 scientists and the National Academy of Sciences has done on 3 pesticides. Well, it's good old Dow.
Well, we've been here before, and in fact, if you're looking at the strands that fed into modern environmentalism, Rachel Carson has got to be one of the genuine heroines of that, taking just extraordinary pressure from parts of the scientific community that disagreed with her. I found myself in 3 separate debates with the president of the National Academy of Sciences, who was a molecular biologist, and candidly, he knew the science a whole lot better than I did. I just had confidence that Rachel was telling it right. And she stood up to all of that, despite the fact that she was in terminal cancer. And Bill Ruckelshaus, a Republican who was the first head of the EPA, an EPA that had been created for political reasons with an executive order by a Republican president, Richard Nixon, Ruckelshaus himself banned DDT.
Wow.
So we've got that potential out there still.
I should put a postscript on. The reason it should scare you that Dow has asked to substitute their science for the National Academy of Sciences is that they gave $1 million contribution to the inaugural process of Donald Trump. I'm sorry, I know you're taping this. What am I doing? But I'm retired. I have no problems. Denis, you're like a hero coming to us, and we're so delighted to see you.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thrilled to be here, Bill.
One last thought? Any specifics for these people?
Well, the specifics, candidly, are in 2 forms. One is walk the talk. We all claim these values, but you need to be doing it in your personal life. Don't buy a giant mansion. Don't buy things that are inefficient. Buy the best. If you're going to need a car at all, buy the car that gets the best mileage and meets your needs. Buy only the computer that has the amount of power that you need for your business. Do everything the best you can. And beyond that, this ultimately is a political fight. And it's going to be won in neighborhoods, in cities, in congressional districts, and in states, and in all of those places, we've got the capacity for victory. No matter what happens nationally, it's going to be implemented by the states and cities, and those people will listen to you.
Let's bring back the 70s. Thank you, Denis. It's great.